All right. Well, hey, I'm thrilled to be up here. We're going to have kind of a conversation, so it'll be a little different. And it's going to be an awkward conversation because I'm the only one with the microphone. But I think what will happen is that I can maybe speak to some of the things you might be thinking about as a church leader, or maybe a leader of a ministry. So let me kind of unpack where I come from just for a little bit, so I give some context to what we're going to talk about. When I was about 5 years old, I moved to this country, and I moved from a small little country in South America, and I didn't understand until many, many years later what that really meant, to actually be here in this country and to make it here. And my mom began to unpack this years later that, man, when she was a little girl, so far before I was even born, there was a church in America that sent a missionary to a small little town in a small little country on the tip of South America. And that missionary spoke the gospel, and she heard it. And she accepted Christ, and it changed her life, and it changed my life. We no longer were Hindus. We were now Christians. And through a series of miraculous events, God allowed us to move to this country. And I came here when I was about 5 years old, and we didn't have much. In fact, we came off the airplane with suitcases, and that's all we had. Somebody let us stay at their house for about 10 days until we can kind of get our bearings. And my dad left us in that period, so it was just my mom and my two siblings. So mom, single mom, 3 kids. We didn't have much. She didn't have many skills, so it's minimum wage, and we kind of survived for a while. But God gave us a church, and that church embraced us. It embraced me as a little boy growing up. And I learned in kids' church who Jesus was, and then I grew up in youth group, and I made friends and mentors that helped me out. I remember going to my first Royals games because somebody, a couple guys in the church decided they were going to take me there. And I can still remember to this very day walking into Kauffman Stadium and looking out on the field for the first time. My eyes were huge. I couldn't believe what I saw. It's the little things like that make a huge difference in the life of somebody. I remember people that would pay for me to go to kids camp or youth camp. And I remember those experiences that I had. Getting to know God, getting to know people, make friends. That would later be in my wedding. I remember how God used the church in my life and how it made a huge impact. And it became a passion for me. The church became a passion for me because I could feel the power firsthand of what the church can do when it's right, when it's done right. And as I became a professional, I basically became a graphic designer, and I would design graphics for different companies, and I would start to create a brand. I started learning about this idea of what is a brand and how do you create it. And I began to learn from these companies that, man, they put a lot of time and energy and effort into figuring out what their brand is. They put a lot of time into this. And there's this whole process, and I became very intrigued with it, and I was like, man, this is a lot of fun, and it's kind of cool. It results in these visuals that are amazing, and it's consistent with who they are. And they've defined who they are in such a powerful way that it draws people to come and to buy their products or their services, whatever it is. So I developed a passion for branding and for design, that type of thing. So God gave me a passion for the church, and He gave me a passion for branding. And then He put those together, and that's where I am now. That's what I do. I help churches create brands. And there's a power behind a brand, and it's so funny because I guess this is supposed to happen, I don't know, but both talks before me are basically on the same topic, but we're just coming from different perspectives. I'll come from a different perspective. I'm coming from maybe the church outside person, the graphic media guy type of perspective. So we're going to cover some of the same things, but it's coming from a different angle, and I think that's going to be super helpful. Whenever I talk to churches, that's always something that there's an aha moment. I never thought of it that way. So my hope is that happens today. So the topic that I'm going to cover is just how branding helps create an attractive church. I think we're all in this room because we want that. We want our church to be attractive. We want our church to be attractive to the people on the outside and also the people on the inside, so they will give their resources to do what God has called us to do. We want our church to be attractive. And when we think about it in the lens of branding, it allows us to create an attractive experience that people want to be a part of. So I'm just going to put up a few, just for fun, a few brands that I've worked on over the recent months even. So the first one is Crossroads Church. This is a church in Fremont, California. And man, this church is amazing. They have this huge diversity of people that go to this church. We're talking, there's Asians and Hispanics and whites and blacks and Indians, a huge diverse congregation. They're going strong. They're right now building a building that they're going to get into in about April. And so they wanted a brand. They wanted to say, hey, we're a church that is welcoming to all people, and we focus a lot on groups, and on small groups and creating tight communities. So then we were able to take that information and create some visuals to help them out. It starts with the logo, but then it goes further beyond that. It goes into much more signage and all these different, the website and all these different things. But it's fun. And then the next one is Strong Tower Church. This is a church in Washington, D.C. area, just south in Fredericksburg. It's actually a Civil War site. And this pastor, Pastor Smith, has a real passion for equipping people with the way they think. And so this brand is really reflective of that, changing the way you think so you can take ground and go ahead and take back what the devil stole, that type of mentality. It's a gospel church. You go in there, the music is lively, it's vibrant, it's a praise experience that's pretty amazing. So this is meant to reflect that. Then there's another church I want to tell you about. This one is New Tribe Church, right? So I was invited to be a part of this process. I want to tell you about this church. This is just outside of Nashville. Pastor Jared's here with us today, and this is a vibrant church, right? There's a vision behind it. It's just a few months old. But they want to build relationships that last and they encourage faith that moves mountains. And we're working through that process. What does that begin to look like? When you come and you step onto the campus, how does that experience speak to that? Oh, there's another church too. You might recognize this one. This is Life Mission Church, right? So this church is all about going into the world, right, and preaching the gospel. It's about... I debated whether I try this or not, but let's try it. It's about loving God, inspiring faith, reaching those far from God, connecting people into community, and transforming lives by revealing God's presence and purpose. That's what this church is all about, right? That's what we're all about in here. And then we, again, with my... it takes me different ways when I start to design. So I got the opportunity to design the Link branding. So the Link branding was basically a group of churches, all of us coming together and forming, being equipped and forming this fellowship of churches, and it's about this coming together type of a thing. So this branding kind of reflects that. So my hope is that you can begin to see that this is just a visual representation of who we are as a church. We're just representing it in a visual way, which is very important. People don't know what we're thinking, so we have to be able to communicate that on the outside. So we have to take time to create a brand, what I'm going to call a brand for the purpose of this talk. So here's what I've seen, though. There's a problem that I notice as I talk to more and more churches. There's too many churches that are perfectly equipped to reach a world that no longer exists. And it's so true, and a couple of reasons why. One is that culture is always changing. It's always moving. It's a moving target. It's never going to remain the same. In fact, right now, it's not normal to go to church. And that's important to understand because I think as church people on the inside of church, we think that way, like, hey, you should just come to church. It's great, you should just come. But people on the outside aren't thinking like that. If they haven't been to a church before, they don't think like that. For them to show up on a Sunday morning and walk through the doors of a church, it's like going to a wedding that you weren't invited to. So we have to think differently. We have to build a brand that breaks down walls before they even get to the property, so they'll actually come in the doors. That's where we can start to talk about, the tactics, Facebook and social media and everything else that we can start to use, the website and podcasts. And we have so many tools as a church. It's never been easier to reach people. That's the encouraging news. Like, it's never been easier to reach people than it is today because we have so many things available, so many tools available to us if we know how to use it. And our brand helps us to understand what to do and what not to do. So there's a couple of struggles that I've seen. One is that on the internal side, a lot of churches kind of hang on to an experience that they've had in the past, and they don't want to let go of that. So as a result, they aren't reaching new people because they're hanging on to an experience of the past, and maybe they're hanging on to a method that has worked, that touched them as a child or when they were younger, and they're reluctant to let go of that. And as a result, that causes people to not want to be a part of that church. It just affects people the way they think about things. There's also just this pressure of, keeping up with things. How do you keep up? How do you know what the right things is to do? So what I want to introduce to you as a help to help us get through this and to help us as a church and even as ministries understand how to get past this barrier of attracting people is the idea of branding, of thinking about creating a brand and defining it. And when I say branding, I just want to unpack what that means so that we're all on the same page, because I think it all gets lumped together. Branding, marketing, advertising, it's all the same thing, right? But they all work together in different ways for different reasons. So I'm going to take a moment just to unpack what this means. What is branding? What is advertising? What is marketing? So branding is defining who you are. It's taking the time to define who you are so that you can control the perception that people have of your ministry. You can think something in one direction, but the way that the people perceive you may not be in alignment with that. Unless you're intentional to build that brand, to define it, then more than likely what people think about your church or your ministry is not what you want them to think. So I want to encourage you to go through a process of defining who you are so that people can understand your church in the way God called you to be understood. So it's important. The other thing about that I want to unpack is the idea of marketing. So marketing is the experience that people have that's consistent with the brand. So once you've created this brand, you've kind of identified what your brand is, you have to build an experience. And that experience happens in different ways. It happens online, it happens when they come on the campus, it happens when they get something in the mail. That experience, it needs to be consistent. So if your church is thinking that, hey, we're a church, we want to build a brand around, we go into the community and we're hands-on, we help the community, then you have to provide a consistent experience. Is your church really in the community, and can people kind of run into you from time to time? Is your church, maybe a lot of churches are wanting to build a perception that they're welcoming. So are you welcoming when people walk onto your campus? Is that something that they feel that you're welcoming? How about when they go to your website? Is it easy to navigate? Can they find what they need? Can they poke around and find out different things? Is it easy? Does it provide a good experience? Most people, 9 out of 10, won't visit your church until they go to your website. So you need to make sure that your web experience is what is really engaging. The other part of it is that when they step onto your campus, is your campus welcoming? When people step foot into your doors, are they greeted warmly? Are they able to find where the bathroom is without having to ask? Because there's a sign of some kind that helps them get there. Or if a single mom shows up and she has a toddler and baby and all this, and hands are full, can she get to where she needs to drop them off without having to ask? Because people don't like to ask until they're ready to be asked something. So can you create an experience like that? That's what marketing is. It's the experience that you create around the brand that you say that you are. The third thing is advertising, and that's basically the messaging that you put out there. Your messaging has to also be consistent with the brand that you're creating. So whenever you're on Facebook or maybe Instagram or Snapchat, anything else that you're using online, or maybe the postcard mailer that goes out, your messaging needs to be consistent with your brand. Whenever there's an inconsistency happening, the voice sounds different and there's a disconnect. And people can feel that disconnect, and it's psychological, but it just doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel right. And it doesn't take much for them to say, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to check them out. So let's take a look, just for kicks, at some companies that are doing this really well. So my hope is to provide just a different perspective so that we think about things from a different angle. So we have a few companies that, well, I guess we'll see if it comes up on the screen. But we'll talk about just Apple for a moment. They're the top brand in the world, the most valuable brand in the world right now. And Apple Computer has a way of thinking that's different. And up on the screen, you see this device right here. In fact, the other day, I was watching Netflix with my wife, and we were watching this show that's this awkward, funny show. It's called The Office. I'm not sure if you guys have heard about it, but it's this awkward show, and it just makes you squirm in your seats a little bit. And for whatever reason, we find it funny. So in The Office, they handed out BlackBerries, and it was funny because The Office was around in the early 2000s. So BlackBerry was a big deal. Like in 2005, BlackBerry was huge. If you were in business, like you had a BlackBerry device. Now, BlackBerry is a company that kind of missed it. They should be really big right now, but they're not because they missed it. They basically were focusing on their product. They're focusing on creating a better BlackBerry and how do you improve the buttons and the way it functions and all that. But then you have a company like Apple who thinks differently. And instead of creating a better product, they're looking at the people that they serve, and they're creating something new to serve them. So they saw a need that, hey, these phones aren't, they aren't that great. So then they come out with the iPhones, and they're listening to the needs of the people, and then they're creating devices as a result of that. So Apple actually took the name Apple Computers. They took the name Computers off, and now they're just Apple. And basically what they're saying is that, hey, it doesn't matter what we create. We're just going to serve our audience, our customers, and we're going to create whatever needs to be created. So they're focusing on people. And as churches, that's really my challenge. We need to focus on people, because if we focus on people, it seems obvious, but at the same time, it's not. If we focus on people and not on what we do or how we've done things in the past, then we're able to adapt and create new experiences that are going to be attractive to the people that we're trying to reach. We have to look at the faces. We have to define who they are. And we have to figure out who God has graced us to reach. And that's a big part of this process, defining your brand. So with that, we need to also create a way that people can get on board with who we are in a simple way. So what I want to introduce to you is a couple of brands that will help us understand what this might look like for a church. So I'm going to unpack Apple just a little bit further to really get to the why behind Apple. Because, we see Apple release a phone and there's a line around the building and people are excited about the product. And we need to understand why that is so that we can leverage that as churches so that we can create that same excitement and buzz within our culture. So what Apple does is they sell this idea of that we think different. That's their brand, that we think different. So they appeal to people who think different. They appeal to people that want to be artists. So their messaging and the experience that they provide is going to be consistent with that brand of thinking different. So when you buy an Apple product, it comes in a white box. It's a blank canvas. They're saying, hey, this is just a tool that you get to use, and then you get to do whatever you want to with it. So to show you just what that looks like, I want you to take a look at this commercial. This was produced about a couple years ago. Let's see if we can get it up there.
We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race. And the human race is filled with passion. Medicine, law, business, engineering, these are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for. To quote from Whitman, "O me, O life of the questions of these recurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish, What good amid these, O me, O life? Answer that you are here, that life exists, and identity. That the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. That the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. What will your verse be?
So it's interesting. They're a computer company. They make iPads and all, but that's their commercial. They're not talking about megabytes or pixels or anything like that. They really changed the game when they started doing this, and it's a really big reason why they are the top brand in the world right now. Let's take a look at another one. Let's take a look at McDonald's real quick, because we've all experienced Apple. We've all experienced McDonald's. McDonald's brand is not a hamburger. It's not about the hamburger. It's really about the system that they've created. There's actually a movie out right now called The Founder. It tells the story of Ray Kroc. And Ray Kroc basically found the McDonald brothers flipping burgers, and he saw that they had this really great system. So then he just created the system over and over and over and over again. And that's what the McDonald brand is all about. It's a consistent experience that you can have. So if you're getting a double quarter pounder in Seattle, it's the same as here as it is in Miami. It's the same thing. There's a safety in that you experience when you go to McDonald's. You know what you're going to get. Or let's take a look at Chick-fil-A. I love Chick-fil-A. I've come to love Chick-fil-A even more now. In fact, my oldest son is going to be 6 tomorrow, so we got a big day coming up tomorrow. And in the last 6 years, I've come to really love Chick-fil-A. Right now, I have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. Whenever I'm in the position where I'm out with all 3 boys and my wife's not there, I'm looking for help as much as I can get it. So I'm going to hope first that it's not Sunday. I'm going to look for a Chick-fil-A. Because I know when I go to Chick-fil-A, I'm going to get some help with my 3 boys. They come around, they're like, hey, did you forget something? And I always do. 12 napkins, 2 spoons, a bendy straw, I need it all. They even have that little thing that you put on the table and you wrap the table and make it waterproof. Awesome. That's exactly what I need. Chick-fil-A adds value. That's their brand. They add value to your experience. And that's what they're always trying to do. That is the brand of Chick-fil-A. So I want to encourage us as churches to think about the people that we're serving and how can we create a brand that is attractive to the people that we're serving. And there's 3 things that'll help us do that. One is that we have to identify our audience. So this is a marketing term, and I'm kind of doing that on purpose so that we can think from a different perspective. Who is the audience, our audience that we're graced to reach? I like that phrase. So who's the audience that's best fitted to the way we do ministry? And many times I get the Sunday school answer when I ask churches this, who are you called to reach? And they'll say everyone. Everyone's not a target, so we need a target. So who are you really able to reach best? What groups of people? Give me 1, 2, maybe 3. And when you give me that and we can focus, then we can build something really great. And other people will be attracted to it by default. If we just need to focus so we can create something really attractive, and people want to be a part of that. So don't feel bad if you're saying, hey, we really want to reach the 65-year-old. It's okay. Like, you can focus on reaching 20-somethings with families, and you know what? The 65-year-old, if they love what you're doing, they'll be a part of it as well. So it's not just that; it's also it's demographics, but it's also like characteristics of who your audience might be. It might be like we were talking about earlier. If they're business people, you just need to define who your target audience is. The second thing you need to do, one thing I wanted to point out too, is that in a way, Jesus had a target audience. Now, I don't want to get super spiritual. That's not my role in this whole presentation, to get into the spiritual side of things. But as I read the Bible with my branding goggles, I began to see different ways that Jesus models this for us. And there's a story in Matthew 15 where there's a Canaanite woman who had a demon-possessed daughter, and she comes to Jesus, and she asked Jesus to heal her daughter, but Jesus rejects. Actually, he didn't even answer her. And then she presses in, and then finally he says to her, I'm here for the Jews right now, not for the Gentiles. And then she begs him a little further, and finally he's like, She says the line, right? Even the dogs eat the crumbs from the master's table. And then finally he heals her daughter. But what it shows me is this, that Jesus was here for the Jews in his 3-year ministry. He had a target audience because he knew that group of people had the foundation to take what he was talking about out further when he'd done and completed his work. So he had a target audience. So you need to have a target audience as well. I want to encourage you to think about it in the sense of who are you really best equipped to reach. And that could shift over time, but right now, what does that need to be? The second thing is that you need to look at yourself as the guide, not the hero of the story. So many times we place our church as the hero of the story. Come, we'll help you. Come, we've got answers. But really what it needs to look like is that we are pointing people to the answer. It's not about us. It's about pointing to the answer. When we think about it in that respect, it might sound right, but sometimes we kind of miss the mark when we're communicating. We put ourselves as the answer instead of pointing to Jesus as the answer. People like to be the hero of their own story. Just real quick, just for fun, I wanted to unpack this. In movies, this is done all the time. People spend a lot of money at movies because it's very clear what's going on. So let's take a look at the Hunger Games real quick. There's Katniss, if you guys are familiar at all. She's the hero. She has to go into the Hunger Games and fight. She has a problem. She doesn't want to fight, but she has to, or else her district is going to be, punished or whatever it is. Then there was a guide that stepped in, Haymitch, the guy from Cheers, He steps in because he'd won the Hunger Games before, and he gives her a simple plan that, hey, if you just win the affections of the people, then they'll sponsor you and you'll be able to win the Hunger Games. So it gives them a simple plan. Or even just real quick, let's take a look at Star Wars. There's Luke Skywalker wants to destroy the evil empire. He has a problem. Empire's in the way. But then there's a guide that comes in, Yoda. And Yoda's been there, done that. So he trains up Luke, and he says, hey, Luke, here's a simple plan. All you got to do is become a Jedi and go defeat Darth Vader, and you're going to win against the Empire. Simple plan. So in a way, as a church, how can we be that? How can we be that guide? How can we provide that simple plan? So the third thing is the simple plan. So be the guide that has a simple plan. So what's the simple path that you can provide to get people to where they need to be? We know that Jesus is the answer. He can solve marriage problems. He can solve kid issues. He can solve depression and all these different things. So as a church, how can we point people to the place where they need to go? What's the simple plan? In an oversimplified way, people, basically they don't know God. They need to come to know who God is and then know that he has a purpose for their life. So it can start to look something like that, but what's a unique plan that your church has to take them through that journey? So focus on a simple plan. So here's what I want to challenge you with. We've talked about how a brand is something we can leverage as a church to create an attractive place that people want to come to. And we've talked about how we can do that by doing 3 simple things. Define our audience, be the guide, not the hero. Let them be the hero to their story. And we've talked about how we need to provide this simple plan. In my illustration of Chick-fil-A, Chick-fil-A is a great guide for me because I get to be the hero of that story. I get to go and my kids will love the food and they're going to have a good time and we're going to be able to eat together and I'm not going to be super stressed out. And then when I go home, I get to tell Melissa that we had a great time and the kids ate. And I'm a hero, right? I'm the hero to the story. They're serving me as a great guide. Apple is serving us as a great guide. Just to go back to that, you can be creative. You can change the world. Here's a tool that helps you do that. It's not about us, the megabytes and the gigabytes and the RAM and all this stuff. It's about, hey, you go change the world. Here you go. Buy our product. You can do that. As a church, how can we do that? How can we be that guide that provides that simple plan? So I want to unpack just for a minute this church that I came into contact with. I'm gonna talk about the bishop for a moment. He's been around for a long time, and he built this. Actually, got passed on this church from his father, who had it before him, and his father had built a great church and then passed it on to the bishop. And he found himself having a problem in that the church was shrinking, and his son called me somehow. He got my phone number, and so we got to talking, and he was like, hey, can we get a new logo? I think we need to do something different, that type of thing. So So Justin and I had this conversation, and we decided through that conversation, and Bishop Vaughn joined us, that really what was happening is that they were building a club. They weren't building a church. They were building a club for like-minded people, because they were looking inward and trying to keep the people that they already have and engage their people. So as a result of that, new people weren't coming in. So that's a very real conversation, and we decided, hey, let's do something different. Let's start to think intentionally about reaching outward. So we designed a logo. We created a website that's easy to navigate. We put up signage in the facility. Beautiful building, been around for since 1908, so over a century. Beautiful building, 3 levels to it. But when you walk into it, you don't know where to go. Like, you don't know where the kids are, the restrooms, anything like that. So we put signage up everywhere. We created this room that was just for guests, because they decided, hey, they want guests to come. They want new people to come. So we created this room, this environment where you can walk into it and you get information about the church and pastors there at the end of service, that type of thing. They wanted to now reach young people, so we kind of repainted another room to say, hey, this is an environment that's welcoming to young people, so it's got all this stuff kind of geared towards young people. And the bishop was kind of reluctant at first to do this. You know, we're talking about all this stuff, and he was like, God, I don't know about all that. So it was kind of funny, though, because Justin, you know, he's a son, so he kind of knows, has the inside scoop. So in the beginning of all this, he basically went one Thursday and removed the bulletin board out of the lobby. The bulletin board, you know, the bulletin that has everything on it, like the church culture is right there. So he removed it out of the lobby, and he bought a flat screen and he put it up. And he didn't like even have anything on the flat screen, but that Sunday people came and they noticed the bulletin board is gone. And there's a flat screen. And then the next week he had something up on the flat screen. And he just started with something very simple. And basically, over time, we're able to change the heart of the bishop and then change the heart of the people. And there's this vibrant momentum that's happening right now. And Bishop Vaughn's super excited about this. He's right here in our community. And he's starting a podcast to help people in his circle of influence start to embrace this new way of thinking. It's very new to them in that community. And he's excited. Just this week I was talking to him. There's over 13,000 people who was listening to his podcast, and he's super excited about that and getting this messaging out there. So it's amazing what can happen when we're intentional about a brand. So I want to encourage you to do this, to take aim and take action. Whatever it is that you need to do right now, based on what we've talked about, take aim at something and then take action towards it. So if there's anything that resonates with you about creating a brand or doing, even if it's something in your church that you just need to focus on to be better at or to narrow down your focus, take aim and take action. Because here's what I've seen. Action without aim is frustrating. So you'll frustrate yourself, and you'll frustrate the people that are on your staff, and you'll frustrate the leaders in your church if you don't take the time to take aim. And that's really what we're talking about when we're defining our brand. We're able to really identify who we are so we can take aim and to go in the right direction. There's actually a story that in the Bible where Elisha's about to die, and the king of Israel comes to him in his last days. And Israel was in a terrible place, enemies all around him. And Syria was coming down, destroying the armies. So the king goes down to Elisha, and God speaks through Elisha, and he tells the king that to pick up his bow and to open up the east window and fire an arrow through the east window towards Syria. And then he was going to take the arrows and strike the ground with the arrows. So basically, what that story shows us, it's in 2 Kings 13:17. I forget, I'm in a room with a bunch of pastors. It shows us that God wanted him to focus. Just focus on your main enemy. There's other enemies that are going on, but for right now, focus there on Syria. I'll give you the victory there, and then we'll move on to the next place. So I just want to challenge you to focus, because I've been on teams before where you're zigging and zagging all over the place, chasing good idea after good idea, but you don't have a focus, so you get burnt out and you're tired, and it happens. So I want to encourage you to, through your branding process, provide this focus for your team. And I want to also encourage you that you don't have to figure out how to win. You just have to figure out where to win right now. If you figure out where you need to win, then you'll be able to figure that out, the hows. God will provide the hows. I've had to learn this in business. It's one of the things I appreciate about being in the business world is that it's not always about figuring out the hows of, figuring out what the problem is. It's just figuring out where you need to focus on right now. So I want to challenge you with this. What is the one thing you need to focus on right now? And my one verse that I wanted to focus on, my focus, is found in Matthew 5:16. It says, "In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify the Father in heaven." The church should be the most attractive place on earth. We are to be the light in our community. When we get I'm going to use the word brand, but you guys kind of know when we get our brand right, we can shine brightly in our community. A candle in this room can throw light a decent amount of distance, but if we focus that light into a flashlight, that light goes even further. So I want to encourage us as churches, as even ministry leaders, to get that focus, to create that brand, that experience that people, that our target audience needs so that we can shine brightly in our community. And really, that's what I've seen in my developing brands for other even companies. What they're doing is that they're lifting up the qualities of who they are so that people can see it and be drawn to it. How much more can we as a church lift up who we are, who God has called us to be, and the life change that happens in our circles and in our buildings, in our events, so that people can see it and be drawn to it. So I'm gonna provide two things just to help you on your journey. So in a way, I want to help you in a way by being your guide in this process. There's a couple of resources. One is a brand guide. So there's a website that's up there. If you want to download a brand guide document, it has like steps on how to create a brand guide for your church. A brand guide is a document that basically where you can write down your values, your mission, your purpose, and begin to identify what are the colors, fonts, and different ways that you can express that consistently. A great brand is built with consistency over time. So this document can help you do that. There's also a questionnaire that allows you to think about things differently. Like, who are you called to reach? It kind of walks you through that, so you can think about those things in a very practical way. And then the other thing I want to leave you with is just a question. And it's for anybody in this room. I think it's for anybody that has any church of any size, no matter if you're in the, out in the rural areas or in the cities, or if you're leading a ministry and you're not maybe a pastor of a church. It's a question that I think will just help you. And that question is this: what would people miss if your church did not exist tomorrow? What would people miss if your church did not exist tomorrow? I think we all share the belief that the church is the hope of the world. But if we're not clear about who we are, then people aren't going to be clear about coming and being a part of it. Let's pray. Lord God, I just thank you for the opportunity to bring this idea and to present it. And I just pray that your Holy Spirit would just guide us as we begin to unpack what it means for us. And I pray that you would just continue to give us perspective, God, fresh perspective as we lead our churches, so that we can do things that are geared towards the people that we are serving. And we're careful not to get into the trap of just thinking about who we are. Lord, I thank you again for the opportunity, and I ask you to guide us as we go from here. In Jesus' name, amen.